We have been spending too much time with Lokis. Or maybe not enough. I'm Max Scoville, and welcome to Canon Fodder, presented by Pokemon Go. Loki Episode 4 finally blows the lid off this whole Timekeeper situation, and if you thought your favorite Trickster God of Mischief was screwed last episode, well, hang on a second because it gets a whole lot worse. Directed by Kate Herron, the Nexus Event unveiled so much. The truth behind the Timekeepers, Sylvie's origin story, and even a call out to the Daywalker himself, Blade. But before we get into that, I've got to warn you, we are about to spoil everything that just went down in Loki Episode 4, and there was a lot, so if you haven't seen it yet or just don't want to know, now would be the best time to just kind of get yourself pruned so we don't ruin it for you.
Am I dead?
Not yet. But you will be, unless you come with us.
Okay, now that we're past the spoiler warning, let's get to the reveals, starting with that post-credits scene. After some capers inside the TVA, our variant Loki gets pruned and wakes up in another reality. Where he is important, but before we get to that, this is clearly another apocalypse, and he's not alone. He is joined by a regular gaggle of Lokis. We got old Loki, we got kid Loki, we have furry Loki carrying a hammer, and the kicker? Alligator Loki. We're gonna break down all these Lokis and the Easter eggs, so hang out for that. Anyway, they're in what looks like a ruined version of New York City. You can see Avengers Tower there in the background. We're guessing this is the same New York we briefly see in a wider shot from the trailers. The new Lokis tell our Loki that he needs to go with them if he wants to survive, and that's the cliffhanger. Now, to recap how we actually wound up there. Loki and Sylvie are stuck on Lamentis 1, seemingly doomed, except as dying planet shrapnel rains down around them, it really seems like Loki and Sylvie are falling for each other, despite this whole impending apocalypse. This connection spikes a gnarly Nexus event, allowing Mobius and the TVA to find them, rescuing them using a couple of clutch time portals. And of course, by rescuing, I mean arresting them. Mobius is pissed, and before he throws Loki through a mystery time door, Loki fills him in on a big secret.
The TVA is lying to you.
Put him in.
Enter Lady Sif, whom we haven't seen since Thor the Dark World and Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. after that. She's in an endless loop of getting pissed at Loki and kicking his ass, which seems cathartic for her. For Loki? Less so. Regardless, she does it again and again. Mobius lets Loki out briefly to sort out what caused the Nexus event. More on that soon. Hang tight. Anyway, Sylvie and Loki wind up in front of the Timekeepers themselves, and there's a battle in the throne room, Loki versus Minutemen and Sylvie versus Ravonna. Loki and Sylvie win. We learn that the Timekeepers were indeed fakes all along, and then Loki gets pruned by Ravonna, gone until he wakes up again in the post-credits scene. Now before this, we understood that anybody who gets pruned is dead, or at least they just stop existing. But Loki's post-credits scene kind of changes all that, at least in Loki's case. When he got pruned, he was sent to an empty, ruined version of Earth with nobody except all the other discarded Lokis to keep him company.
The universe wants to break free, so it manifests chaos.
This episode also gave us the clearest explanation yet of Sylvie and her backstory. We opened on her version of Asgard, and as she's sitting there playing as a little kid, Ravonna shows up through a time door dressed like a regular Minuteman, so this is in her past. She captures young Sylvie and takes her to the TVA, but Sylvie steals Ravonna's temp pad, opens a portal, and escapes. And she's been living on the run ever since. So Sylvie is a Loki, just the same as our Loki is a Loki, but after having lived on the run from a time and space jumping agency like the TVA for her entire life, kinda made Sylvie grow up to think of who she is differently. Just being born a Loki made her a target, so she stopped being a Loki as much as she could. Anyway, somewhere along the line, Sylvie figured out that she could hide out in apocalypses and avoid spiking Nexus events all over the place. So what caused the Nexus event on Lamentis 1? Mobius figures out that Loki and Sylvie fell for each other, and that's what caused it, and that Loki and Sylvie falling for each other is the most Loki thing imaginable.
You're all variants! Everyone who works at the TVA. The Timekeepers didn't create you, they kidnapped you from the timeline and erased your memories.
Mobius tries to deny the truth, but he refuses to just forget about the fact that Ravonna says Minuteman C-20 is dead, so he does some good detective work and refuses to let it go. He steals Ravonna's temp pad and figures out she's lying. Problem is, Ravonna is 2 steps ahead. She shows up, and just before she has Mobius pruned, he says he hopes he goes back to where he came from.
Who had a jet ski? That's what I'd like to do. Just ride around on my jet ski.
Prune him.
Earlier in the episode, Ravonna makes a point to ask Mobius where and when he would go on the timeline if he had a chance. Ravonna seems to pity Mobius, and it's very possible she sent him exactly where he's always wanted to go. The mid-90s, jet skiing with an ice-cold can of Josta Cola. Remember in episode 1 when Loki calls the whole TVA a cruel, elaborate trick played to inspire fear? Well, he was right. That's exactly what it is. We find out in this episode that the Timekeepers are basically like the MCU Space Lizard version of Chuck E. Cheese robots.
Mindless androids.
So if this was a big Wizard of Oz type situation, who is the person or being behind the curtain? Who is really controlling the TVA and the Space Lizard animatronics? Here are the top 3 candidates. Number 1, Ravonna. The episode opens with Ravonna going up the escalator to see the Timekeepers. She's also in the throne room at the end when Sylvie and Loki figure out the truth, so it's very likely that Ravonna is at least aware of the TVA scam and is working to preserve it and her place in it. The only reason we'd say she's not the top suspect in all this is because when we see her abduct young Sylvie, presumably in the past, Ravonna is wearing TVA Minutemen garb. She clearly worked her way up inside the TVA once there. Is she running the whole shebang?
You're gonna tell me.
Looks like Sylvie's about to find out. Number 2, Kang the Conqueror. We've mentioned Kang in every Loki Canon Fodder episode so far, and we are duty-bound to do it again here. Until we know for sure that Kang the Conqueror is not somehow behind all of this, we have to assume that he is. He's a time-jumping supervillain, that's his whole deal. Plus, he has a thing with Ravonna Renslayer in the comics, so it seems likely that Ravonna could be working on behalf of Kang as he takes control of the multiverse. We could also just really want to see Kang before Ant-Man 3. And finally, possibility number 3, it's another Loki. All the pruned Lokis hanging out together in the ruins of New York further supports this theory. Why have they all been targeted the same way Sylvie was? Because other Lokis represents the biggest threat to a scenario where there's one Loki to rule them all. We still think there's one more ultimate Loki behind the TVA playing a cruel, elaborate trick on the rest of existence across all of space and time to inspire fear, which really is just a very Loki thing to do. Okay, it's time for the Easter egg hunt. Here's the ones we spotted. Let's start with the new variant Lokis. Old Loki is played by Richard E. Grant. That getup he's wearing looks pretty similar to the way Loki looked in his earliest Marvel Comics appearances. Kid Loki is played by Jack Veal, yet another Young Avengers character officially introduced into the MCU along with Wiccan, Speed, Stature, and Patriot. And then we got Alligator Loki, I guess? Played by an actual alligator, I assume. We're guessing this is a nod to Frog Thor in the comics. If Thor can be a frog, Loki can be an alligator. Why not? And then there's the 4th Loki, played by Diobia Opari. Wielding a hammer that's probably not Mjolnir, or maybe it is. He actually tweeted a better look at his hammer and gear on Twitter.
You know, we brought in Kree, Titans, vampires. Why is it the 2 orphan demigods are such a pain in the ass?
Now, it seems like a throwaway line between Mobius and Hunter B-15 is not a throwaway line. Now, while Morbius, the living vampire, is a Marvel character, he's a Sony-controlled character because he first appeared in the pages of Spider-Man comics. Jared Leto is going to play him in an upcoming movie that may come out at some point, but so far that's not directly connected to the MCU. So, who are they talking about? Blade. Quick reminder that Mahershala Ali is signed on to be Blade in the MCU, so this line is a casual reference to him. And of course, Blade is technically half vampire, which makes him the Daywalker, but okay, we're just splitting hairs now. They were talking about Blade. Moving on, Mobius also references Kree and Titans in his exchange with B-15. The Kree we met back in Guardians of the Galaxy, and then again in Captain Marvel, and the last time we saw a Titan? The Lady Sif looped scene is actually a nod to the creation of Mjolnir, Thor's hammer, in Norse mythology. Loki cuts Sif's hair as a goof, and then Thor threatens to pulverize Loki for it, but Loki convinces him to go find Sif some new hair, and that leads him to some dwarves who forge Mjolnir and gift it to Thor. And speaking of Norse mythology, when young Sylvie gets snatched by Ravonna in the TVA as a kid, she's playing with little Viking toys, but that dog? That's Fenris, the giant Asgardian wolf who fought for Thor and Loki's secret sister Hela in Thor Ragnarok. Remember him? But what did you think of this episode of Loki? Who is really behind the TVA, and what is the deal with the new variant Lokis? And where is it they're hanging out? But most importantly, do you think Mobius is going to get his jet ski vacation? I hope he does. He seems nice. Hit us with your theories in the comments. Anyway, thank you for watching this episode of Canon Fodder. For more MCU, check out how Loki could be setting up Secret War, and remember to follow and subscribe to IGN wherever you like to watch. We'll see you next week, true believers.
A bad memory prison? How quaint.